Okay? Pemberton, paternalistic, preacher. How could you be a child of John and Marjorie Pemberton and not be able to communicate? If you did not hear John and Marjorie present their work when they were younger and active in Zimbabwe and before that Southern Rhodesia, you missed a treat. John, a great preacher who could have held any pulpit in America, in my estimation, and his mother thought so especially. I think his mother, he once told me, was just real upset when he decided to go to Africa because she already knew that he was the next P.H. Welshamer, I think, and our brother or something. But he had great speaking ability. But Marjorie Pemberton didn't take a back seat to her husband. They both knew how to communicate the gospel. And how could you be a child of that environment and not be able to do it? From Sherman, and Pam, I'm sure does preaching in her own way, and with her and George and the work they've done around the world, and praise God for that. Sherman, I learned in college, had the ability to stand up on any subject and make sense out of nonsense. And I don't know, did you take debating somewhere along the line or something? But anyway, he was a great speaker. John Mark was the cerebral one of the group, a deep thinker, and the best sermon I ever heard him preach was the last sermon I heard him preach. He was getting better and better. But for my money, Bob was the preacher in the family. He had the passion, he had the sense of purpose, and he had that rapport with the audience that just made him know, when to say what needed to be said and when to bring the message home. It brought me joy to know that the last task that he performed in this world before he went home to glory was to preach before his beloved Cheredza congregation one last time. And I've heard stories that it was a classic Bob Pemberton sermon that pointed people to higher ground as they sought to walk the Christian life. One final plea, he was personal. Again, I think of John and Marjorie and strong personalities. John Pemberton was the most intense man and the most focused man that I think I've known in 40 years of ministry, and I say that with great respect. I knew him as his preacher in his retirement years, so I knew a softer side of it. But I know he could be demanding. And I just want to say, I don't believe he was born on the sunny side of the street, okay? He found Jesus and he made his way there, but his wife Marjorie always was on the sunny side of the street, right? And could always look at things and say a half-filled glass was half full, and could always see the upside. And I say that to say this, that I think Bob got more of Marjorie than any of the other kids. Now, I don't mean you guys are grumpy. Oh, God. But Bob could spend 5 minutes with you when you first met him, and you felt like you had a friend for life. You felt like you had someone who believed in it. Steve Allen, who couldn't be here and really regretted it, said, and Stephen and Bob didn't always see eye to eye. We know that about some of the decisions that were made. But he said about Bob, he said, Bob made me a better man. He believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. And what a thing to say. And just the things that I've heard from people here and in the last few days just makes me realize more and more what a personality this man had. And especially the gift of laughter. Tom Lawson couldn't be here. Bob had that self-effacing humor that caused him to laugh at himself as much as anybody else. And Tom told a story in a letter he sent to me today that sort of gets into that. He says, you know, first of all, Bob talked me into going to Zimbabwe. Tom hadn't traveled internationally. He said, the two of us with our decidedly American backsides trying to squeeze into seats on British air that demonstrate Europeans really are in better shape. I remember us sitting there trying to appear comfortable when we were convinced our two behind-the-seat televisions were both messed up. They kept changing channels seemingly at random. We checked and no other screens were doing that, just ours. I was about ready to call the flight attendant, Tom said, when Bob, in an act of Olympic contortion, twisted sideways and wrenched the remote control out of the side of the armrest, a side his ample posterior had been pressing against the airline seat. With one look at me, I knew exactly what he was suggesting. I twisted, not nearly as sprightly as my taller friend, and freed my own remote control from its crushing against the hip encounter with me. Sure enough, the TV stopped changing channels, and we had a good laugh. And then Tom went on to say, we always had a good laugh. To think of Bob is to think of laughter. And to think of Bob gone is to recognize there will be far less laughter in my life. Folks, we live in a world where we have the greatest hope of all. And yet it is a dark world because of sin. And thank God for Christian men like Bob Pemberton who share the message joyfully. I close my section with just the thought that I always thought that Bob Pemberton was never quite home. You know, he was born in what was then southern Rhodesia, spent 16 of his first 18 years there. He would be a citizen of Zimbabwe and of the United States and have dual citizenship for a number of years. And you know, let me be honest with you. Bob understood our culture very well, but, you know, if there were ever some times that he did or said things that seemed strange for this land, you'd have to just understand, he was more Zimbabwean at heart than he was American. And when he was here, sometimes I had the sense that he was just a little uncomfortable. And then I went to Zimbabwe and I saw him in his element and I saw how great he was there. But then sometimes when we would sit and talk, and I had a sense that, you know, that wasn't quite home either. And I'm just so thankful today that my friend, your friend in the Lord, has found home.